Well, hello everyone. Thank you for taking the time to view my presentation. I'm excited to be able to present my capstone study for you on team-based organizations. Let's get started. Team-based organization is definitely something that I'm interested in, and so I wanted to present this for my capstone study. I began gathering interest in this topic from one of the other courses in this management program, Organizational Behavior. I identified that it was an interesting new organizational model, well, somewhat new, as we'll see, and that it could have impacts in other areas, including potentially my own department. At the same time, IMT Engineering was going through a process of change. They had a leadership change, and they needed to find some ways to be more efficient, eliminate silos of work, and increase knowledge sharing. So based on some of my feedback and also the leadership's knowledge of Toyota's lean model, IMT Engineering made the decision to implement a team-based organization in early 2014. And so I thought it would be interesting to follow up that decision and do a study, an analysis of that decision and the interesting things, the good things that were done, and also some of the challenges. So what is a team-based organization? This is different than a traditional hierarchical organizational model where you have managers and groups of people that work under those managers. In team-based organization, the teams are the focus, and management provides high-level direction, but the teams are responsible for deciding what needs to be done and how to do that work. And management just provides general direction and encourages teamwork together. So IMT Engineering, as you can see, this is their engineering org chart from 2013. And you can see that there's managers and groups of workers underneath those managers. This is a traditional hierarchical organizational model. And what they were finding is there were silos of work where people under the managers were not crossing over into different areas to work together on problems. So after the change, this is the new engineering org chart. And you can see it's very different. There's clouds representing the product teams. And these teams are cross-functional product teams that are responsible for the different areas and different tasks within the department. So the purpose of this study, we're going to identify some lessons that can be learned from this implementation of team-based organization and try to understand if these lessons can help other managers that might be looking for ways to be more efficient and might be looking at the team-based model. For my literature review, I looked at multiple examples of team-based organizational implementations. I was very surprised to find that there were other reviews that were very similar to mine, including a brand new book called Team of Teams, looking at the US military, and also some different libraries in South Korea and then also the University of Arizona in academic settings. Those were very useful to this. We also looked at some important concepts relating to team-based organizations, the role of leadership, issues in decision-making, keys to successful implementation, and how to assess the effectiveness of it. That was especially useful as we were looking at how things went with IMT Engineering. So my methodology. I did both a survey and I did some in-person interviews. For the survey, I utilized a survey from another book that I found called The Survey of Cross-Functional Teamwork. It had 15 questions. I used the Likert scale and sent that out to all the members of IMT Engineering. For my in-person interviews, I interviewed the Executive Director of Technology and also the Director of Engineering. Those are the two that were responsible for making the decision to change to a team-based organizational model. I wrote down some predefined open-ended questions, and I used those questions for both interviews. So, what did we find? The results from my survey. We had 15 respondents of the 19 total staff members. a pretty good response rate. The overall mean score was 2.83, and as you remember, we had a Likert scale of 1 to 4, so 2.83 is generally above the average, the midpoint of 2.5, which means that it's in the good range, the agree range. 11 out of the 15 questions received more strongly agree and agree than disagree and strongly disagree, which again shows positive signs for this team-based organization. And 6 out of the 15 questions received a mean score of more than 3, which is ranging closer to strongly agree with the questions. So let's take a look at some of the actual questions and the results. The results shown in this question, in general, my cross-functional teams are successful. You can see that there is a mix. There is more agree and strongly agree, but you can see that also some team members are not fully on board with the team-based organizational model. This is an interesting first result. Secondly, team leaders and team members have been trained on team effectiveness. You can see a strong disagreement with this question. Only 2 people responded in the strongly agree category. This is definitely an issue that we'll have to take a look at for the team-based organizational model. The next question, I receive appropriate recognition for my contributions. This one, different from training, received a very positive, strongly agree result. A real positive sign for the management of teams, and that teams feel like they're a part of what's going on and they're receiving recognition for it. So the interviews, I had really good interviews with the leadership, and what I found is that there were other organizational needs, things like organizational change elsewhere in the IT group, and other things that took away from the team-based organizational implementation and really took away from the focus of completing that implementation. They also identified that there was inexperience of team leaders to facilitate teams. The way team-based organization works is you set up team leaders for each of the teams, and those team leaders help facilitate and also provide some direction. They found that the team leaders that they selected may be good thought leaders in their areas, but they weren't really very good at pulling together groups of people and keeping them moving together. This also gets to the training question that we talked about earlier that could have been helped with this. Also, they identified that management pulled back too far in providing technical direction. Specifically, the director of engineering was involved technically in some of the groups, and when he pulled back to allow the teams to work on their own, this caused some of those groups to move ahead much slower than anticipated. So there were some good signs of success that we saw. Through the interviews, we identified increased job satisfaction for IMT engineering staff. This really got to breaking down the silos of work because people were allowed to work together. They enjoyed their job more. They got to know people. They had relationships. They had conversations, and this made for a better job. Also, an increase of quality of work. As the teams were working together, they were discussing ideas and making decisions as a team instead of on their own. And so the teams were doing a better job at what they were doing and coming up with better ideas. So some of the lessons for our managers. First, the length of time to implement team-based organization was much longer than anticipated. There were some reasons for that, but the initial thought was 6 months to a year. It's been close to 2 years now, and they're still not where they would like to be. They're making progress, but there's still work to do. Also, successful implementation requires training for all levels of the department. Training is a normal thing, but training team members, training team leaders, and even training management. This is a real gap that I found in the literature, that they identified that training was important, but not to the level that it was really required for success. Some of the weaknesses of my study. As I mentioned earlier, there's only 19 people in IMT Engineering, and even though we got a good percentage of responses, it's still a small sample size. And so I think in order to do additional work in this area, it would be good to have a larger sample size, a larger group of people that could respond to give feedback. Also with the survey, there was not demographic information about the people that took the survey questions. And so that limited what we could actually do with some different questions of, whether the males were more interested in training or different things than the females in the group. This was a limitation. So I'm really excited to see the comments that you have. And I look forward to being able to engage with you through some of your comments, positive and also some criticisms. I hope to be able to really improve my study. After this is completed, I will be presenting my study to the leadership of IMT Engineering. And so your feedback is going to be really important for that. Thanks for taking the time.